Okay, guys, the passcode is do. You need the do at the end. But I know you guys, you can come in. But you got to remember, it's still free speech prohibition. We're at a speakeasy, so if the cops show up, we have to get the hell out of here. Upstairs, I got Michael Shermer, you know, the guy who started Skeptic Magazine, brilliant dude, kind of liberal. And then we have Dinesh D'Souza, whom you know very well. We've had him on the show a few times. He's farther right than Michael is left, but they disagree on a lot of things. We're going to find out exactly what. But you got to keep it down. And again, any cops show up, we run. Come on. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. This show is called Free Speech, and every episode we like to see what we have in common and what we don't have in common. And you two seem pretty similar. You run Skeptic Magazine. You're a skeptic. Let's start with what you don't have in common. You're an atheist, Michael?
I am.
And you believe in the big guy upstairs.
I do.
Now, this might swallow up the whole show, but the thing I always ask atheists is, how do we get here? Who facilitated the big boom?
Well, nobody facilitated it. It just happened. Now, not just randomly, but the idea is that once you initiate a system with energy in it, complexity naturally develops from the laws of nature. Now, where Dinesh and I will kind of probably end up at this epistemological wall, well, how did it all begin? But once you get the thing running, then the laws of physics and biology kind of take over and you get complex systems. Not randomly, but through certain selective forces like natural selection.
Because it's difficult to defend the nuances of the Bible with Noah and everything, but I've always thought with deism, if you do the domino thing where he came up with the first domino, I find that harder to argue against. Or do you go right to the end, Noah in every single detail?
Well, dominoism used to be called deism, right? The idea that sort of God authored the universe and then kind of went on a lengthy vacation and the universe played out according to laws. Now, to me, laws don't self-generate. A law is a description of an orderly pattern. Whenever, as human beings, we see orderly patterns, we see a head rolling in an alley, we're like, that didn't just get there. Somebody chopped off somebody's head.
Right.
That's how
we should say that we're shooting in Mexico for this episode.
Is there actually a head out there?
It's affecting the analogies.
The analogies are drawn from ordinary experience.
From outside.
Just outside, I saw a head, and you naturally.
Hi, this is Anthony Cumia,
Hello, I'm Gavin McInnes.
and together we're Compound Censored.
And we would like you to subscribe with this deal using this promo code right below me right now.
Do it, because it's very entertaining.
Immanuel Kant, the philosopher, basically said, when I look at the universe, two things astonish me. The starry heavens above and the moral law within. He's talking about two kinds of laws. The laws of nature, natural laws, and then the moral law. And I think that both those laws require some sort of a legislator. And that's God. So it's a very simple way of thinking. These things couldn't just self-generate. How did they come to be? How did we come to be? And science answers a lot of questions, but it doesn't answer, I would call them, ultimate questions. So if you think about, why do we have a universe? What's our purpose? What happens after we die? I can't think of even any empirical type of data that could resolve that kind of a question. And the ordinary probabilities of experience. See, if somebody said, I don't believe in men who have three eyes, I would say, yeah, that's because you have a lot of experience of human beings walking around. You've never seen a dude with three eyes, so you'll be really surprised if you did. But if some guy goes, on the same basis, I don't believe in life after death, I go, wait a minute. You've never been to the other side of the curtain. You have no idea any more than I do what comes after death. So for you to pontificate about what you know about something you can't possibly know is actually the arrogance to me of modern atheism.
So you're calling Michael arrogant?
He's a little arrogant. He's very charming on the exterior. He has a charming exterior, but underneath is
Instead of morality, it's just arrogance.
It's a smoldering know-it-allism that has exacerbated his family members for a long time.
So the real skeptical position is just to say, we don't know what happens, say, after you die. You don't know, I don't know. If we knew for sure, we wouldn't have these discussions. We'd be looking forward to whatever it is we're going to or something. Nobody knows. So there's a leap of faith you have to take that I'm just not willing to take.
Right, but isn't the believer, see, if I call myself a believer, that would be in contradistinction to being a knower, right? I wouldn't say I'm a believer in my brother, because I know I'm my brother. I know the guy, right? So a believer actually acknowledges the truth in what you're saying. I'm a believer because I actually can't know in the same human sense that we know other things. So there's an agnosticism, I think, built into the theist position that is a meeting ground of atheism and theism, which is to say, we both don't know, but I think your mistake is that if you don't know, you by default go to the no. I don't know, therefore there isn't. But see, I think that's a logical fallacy.
Not that there isn't, that we just don't know, and the burden of proof is on you, the claimant, to give us evidence why you think this afterlife exists. And I just say, I'm withholding judgment until there's good evidence.
But you're withholding judgment on a question on which there never could be good evidence. You're stacking the deck.
Well, if somebody came back and told me, where my aunt hid the jewels, and I found them, then that would be a little piece of evidence there.
Well, but you're demanding empirical evidence when death itself is the end of our empirical experience.
But we don't know that. Consciousness may continue in some other form through a quantum field, and maybe you, the Christian, are not right, but Deepak Chopra, the Buddhist, is right. It could be that version. So right off the bat,
that's the beauty of
you're
deism.
assuming there's two positions. There's actually
a
a bunch of different positions you could take on this. I'm just saying that I'm skeptical of all of them. Dinesh is skeptical of most of them except this one.
Well, my view on skepticism is this, and that is that there are certain questions in life where we don't know. We can reasonably wait for the evidence to come in. Will Trump be reelected? We're going to know by next November, right? But there are other questions. You're dating a woman. You're not sure if you should propose marriage. Now, someone could say to you, well, Michael, since you're an agnostic, you can't possibly know what life with this woman is going to be like for the next 50 years. Therefore, you should withhold judgment until you have
to make a decision. Yeah,
right. Life is lived forward, and very often in the teeth of uncertainty, we make decisions like that all the time. And they're not irrational, because so when empirical evidence is not available, it's not irrational to go with the odds, to use the information you do have to infer what you don't.
Yeah. Well, here's how I think about it. As I go forward, I think, well, if there is an afterlife, I'm willing to be pleasantly surprised, assuming it's a good place to go. I'm not so sure about the Christian heaven. As you know, our mutual friend Christopher Hitchens called it the celestial North Korea. Here you are in this place with a deity that knows everything, knows all your thoughts, and controls everything, and you have eternal bliss with this person. That doesn't sound heavenly. How do you square that one?
Well, liberty is an important value in a life of uncertainty, in which we make choices when there are let's say, for example, if I were to tell you, Michael, there are two paths. Here's a path which leads to constant eternal happiness, and here's a path that leads to constant eternal misery, right? And rationally, once you pick the path, you don't have any choice. You just follow that path.
Yeah.
Doesn't it make sense to say, I'll pick the path of eternal happiness? It's not that important to me to make choices at that point, because I've chosen the path of eternal happiness. Normally, all my choices are aimed at, I'll be happier if I do this and if I do that. This looks like a better way to go than that. But if I'm telling you in advance, this is the best way to go no matter what, I'm happy to relinquish my liberty for eternal happiness.
Yeah.
It's not even a tough call.
But what do you mean relinquish your liberty? I mean, you're making choices now.
I'm making it, right. And remember, no believer believes that there's no choice at the outset. So what I'm saying is I am freely, willfully embracing the Christian outlook. And if I'm right, it leads to eternal happiness. And once I get to heaven, let's just say, for example, that there's no freedom in heaven. We only have the freedom to worship God. And you'll be eternally happy by doing that. I'm saying, does that sound like a terrible prospect to you?
Yeah, but I mean, you could do that now with just taking, happy drugs. You could just, put an IV drip of a feel-good drug and just sit there in your room all day feeling good. That isn't what life is about. What gives life meaning is challenge and striving and so forth. a heaven in which you're just blissfully happy all the time doesn't sound all that heavenly to me.
Because you're confusing life and afterlife. I mean, in other words, that's what life is about. I agree, and that's why the believer thinks of life as a pilgrimage. I mean, it's a trial, it's a journey. We're kind of on our way to Mecca, if you want to call it that, in a humorous way, and we have all kinds of adventures along the way. But at some point, the goal is to get to Mecca. I mean, it's to get to a destination.
Our definition of heaven, I find, is just a flailing mortal attempt to grasp something that's indescribable and unfathomable, just like infinity. So Ricky Gervais, the comedian, he likes to laugh at Catholics, and he says, you think Buddhists are going to jail, and the cargo cult of Papua New Guinea, who worship planes, they're all going to, not jail, hell. Yeah. And everyone's going to hell but me. But I see it differently. I see all of us recognizing an innate understanding that there's something up there, and we flail and we try to put it together. The cargo cult in Papua New Guinea, I think, did a really bad job. I think Catholics are doing a better job, but we're all just trying. And I think the fact that we all recognize that there's something up there, from the most secluded tribesman to the urbanite in Manhattan, proves that God exists.
But better job of what? By what criteria?
Figuring out what there isn't. Yeah. Planes are not celestial. Okay. Planes are built by
understanding the universe. Okay, so there we're on my page of science and so on. Here's another way to think about it, Dinesh. You remember in Woody Allen's a film, Annie Hall, where he has that flashback scene where he's a little kid and he won't do his homework, and his mom takes him to the psychiatrist. He says, why won't you do your homework? Alvy Singer. And Alvy says, the universe is expanding. And he's like, what? The universe is everything there is, and it's just expanding, and one day it's going to all blow up, so there's no point in doing my homework. And his mother yells at him, what's the universe got to do with it? We live in Brooklyn. Brooklyn's not expanding.
Yeah.
And so I think this kind of like, well, what happens after you die, or if there's no God, then there's no objective morality or whatever. These are like these kind of existential, eternal questions that are super interesting, but we live in Brooklyn. And so it doesn't really matter whether there's an afterlife or not. We live in this life. And the goal is to make the best life we can for you, for me, for society, and so on, and work toward those goals. And if it turns out we get rewarded in the end, okay, that's fine. Maybe I'll get there and I'll see you, and Carl Sagan will be there, or maybe it'll be Deepak, and it'll be this sort of quantum field world. I don't know. But tomorrow, it doesn't really matter. Tomorrow I got to go live life.
But morality, I mean, look, I in terms of astrophysics and how the universe is designed and whether it was designed, that I agree is a question you may almost say for specialists, right? The ordinary guy probably doesn't think much about it, except the ordinary guy probably thinks it didn't all just get here. But morality is a function of ordinary life. I mean, we couldn't conduct ourselves so well. In fact, human beings that don't have morality are what? Sociopaths, psychopaths. So morality is a part of human experience. You know this, you've written about it. And so thinking about whether something is right or wrong, and how do I know it's right or wrong, and this little voice inside of me that is clearly part of me and yet in a way not part of me. And I say not part of me because it militates against a lot of things I want to do. So I'm tempted to X, but the little voice goes, no, don't tell a lie, don't do that, that's not right, you can't do that, you can't take advantage of this person. So we've got this thing inside of it, and every human being's aware of it. And so to think about what is the source of that, this kind of, Adam Smith calls it the impartial spectator, the man within the breast. All right, and so even secular people have that.
Okay, so let's not be ethereal then. Let's be specific. Abortion. Are you for or against abortion, Michael?
Well, personally, I'm against it. I wouldn't do it. Well, with my wife. But here I see conflicting rights. Often in society we have conflicting rights. They don't always go together. We favor this right or we favor that right. I, of course, am supportive of the rights of the fetus, but I slightly favor the rights of adult women to make those choices. And I could definitely see your position. I know your arguments, and yes, it's killing a human being. It is a human. I'm not saying it's a ball of tissue and we're going to use these other words that are kind of clinical and medical so we can distance ourselves from it. Let's call it what it is. It's a human. But the adult woman is also a human, and more than that, a person, a civilian, a citizen with rights and so on. So I err on the side of giving women the choice, in part because, not just for the scientific reasons, and I think the law has found the right, the first trimester into the second trimester, about when consciousness comes online at about 27 weeks or so.
Well, in New York State, it's 9 months now.
Well,
like Canada.
I disagree with those. I know about those laws. Those are, I think, wrong. At some point you have to draw the line and say you can't abort your fetus at 8.5 months. That would be immoral. But at 1 month, it's just a ball of tissue. Really, it's not. It's a potential human, but it's not. There's no consciousness. There's no sense of self. There's no feeling of pain or suffering. There, with the conflicting rights, I'm going to side with the woman rather than that. So that's the medical reason. The second reason is that historically, the arc of the moral universe has bent more and more when we give people autonomy and choice over their own bodies than when we don't. So this starts with slavery and torture and capital punishment and so on, all the way up to women's rights and gay rights and so on. Giving women that reproductive choices that men have always lorded it over on them has always been a source of moral progress when we release women from the bondage of men kind of dominating their choices. That's my argument.
But once let's think it out. If once you admit, I'm a little surprised that you do admit that the unborn, the fetus, is, hard to deny its life. Hard to deny its human life. It's clearly not a toad, right?
Yes, yeah, right. It's
developing human life, and I think you concede it is also independent human life. Once you admit that, doesn't all the analogies you gave, like slavery, cut against you? Because, if you think about it, ultimately, slavery was about pitting two people's rights against each other. The slave, who did not want to be enslaved, and the slave owner, who wanted the freedom to buy and sell, to engage in commerce, to use the slave as an article of merchandise. And ultimately, the anti-slavery revolution was a way of saying, listen, once you concede, this was Lincoln's point, if the slave is a hog, then go ahead and buy and sell. But if once you concede that the slave is not a hog, but is in fact human, and whether you think it's less intelligent or doesn't even matter, once you concede it's human, then choice is overridden by the content of the choice. You have the choice, but just as you don't have the right to swing your fist in a way that's going to come into contact with my jaw, your choice would seem to stop at the boundary of somebody else's life choices.
Yeah. See, the problem we have is it's with the abortion issue, it's a continuum. So 1 week, 6 weeks, 12 weeks. At some point, when does consciousness come online? When is the fetus a human person and so on? And we know, like, if you kill a pregnant woman at 8 months pregnant, it's a double homicide. So the law has said that's an actual person. So at some point, we just have to draw the line. And I think the
line has for a while has been, can it live outside the womb?
Viability.
And that's 28 weeks.
Yeah, but that's been brought down because of medical technology.
Right. What if it gets brought down to 4 weeks?
Yeah, I know. This is a hard problem.
Well, not only that, but I think one way to think about it, I credit this to my daughter, who's writing about this subject, Danielle. So she's on Facebook, right? And she's at the age where all her friends in their 20s are getting married, they're getting pregnant, and so they post. They put ultrasounds up on Facebook, and they go, check out my baby. It has little legs, it has little arms, it's starting to move, it's doing this. And what's interesting about this is that, first of all, they're not talking about abortion, but in a different context, they take it for granted that this being inside of them is a kid. They have no doubt about using that language. Now, interestingly, it's not them. All their friends, probably pro-choice, most of them, are weighing in. Oh, it's so cute. Oh, this is amazing. What are you going to name it? Etc. There's a shared understanding among all these people in the conversation that what they're talking about is an independent human being and not an extension of the woman's body. So to me, that's very informative about. It's just that in the abortion context, we freeze our brain and act like we don't know all the things that everyone else knows.
So the question is, when does it become a person? Because that's really what we're talking about. So, in your example, the women with a 6-week-old fetus are calling it, essentially treating it like it's a person. Legally, personhood doesn't begin until, different states have different, but just say the end of the second trimester. No abortions after that. I would agree, because at some point you just draw the line. And again, science has this continuum, and the law says, we got to draw the line somewhere, and before it's not, and after it is, it's a binary choice because that's the legal system. Okay, I recognize that, but I think we've kind of evolved to the point where we've kind of found the natural place. Well, that's about right, such that we're going to say you can abort at 8 and a half months. No, that we all kind of have an intuition that's wrong. One final point, historically, just as a practical measure. What's our goal here? It's in terms of getting rid of abortion, it's to reduce unwanted pregnancies. That's the step back. What's the goal? Is to reduce unwanted pregnancies. How do we do that? Empowering women, giving them economic power and more choices, access to birth control, and so on. They will then naturally use that and make the choices to not get pregnant when they don't want to be. Now, it's never going to be zero, of course, but that's the goal.
It seems like with New York feminists, though, it's cool. I've had 5, and it's becoming birth control. They've had more autonomy, more power, and they seem to be using it to get more abortions.
Yeah, I don't think very many people. I know I've seen a few of those. It's like, whoa. Okay, we would agree on.
Well, I mean,
that.
I think there's more common ground here than you see in the political space. There's no question about that. I think but the second thing is, and this is actually parallel to slavery also. There was a movement in slavery when, in the time of the founding, slavery was seen as a necessary evil. By a necessary evil, very well expressed in Thomas Jefferson. We have a wolf by the tail.
Yeah.
We can't hold him. We can't let him go. That ambivalence. This is a Southerner. This was the mood in Virginia. Madison felt this way. Washington, to a degree, did also. But by the 1830s, you started having people trumpet slavery as a positive good. Slavery is a good thing. It's good not only for the master, which we know, but it's good for the slave. And I think we've seen the same disturbing evolution, you might say, in the abortion debate.
But and one final point on that, on the practical historical aspects. Before abortion, like say before 1900, infanticide was pretty common, even in the West. So we don't want to go back to that, obviously, but women are making choices one way or the other. Mostly they're, hardness of life, not hardness of heart. It's just sort of a triage. I got to do this because I can't afford this kid. I can't afford, the 8th kid. I already have 7, whatever it is. That's what life used to be like. So again, I'd rather give women these choices, the technology, the economic empowerment, to then bring down the amount of unwanted pregnancies, and that will naturally reduce abortion rates.
Well, look, except I don't think we are living in those Spartan times when the unwanted child had to be left on the mountainside or whatever, because the truth of it is that we have an adoption industry in this country. There are people who are waiting to have a kid, and so if the burden on the woman is, listen, look, I know you didn't want this kid, but if you carry it to term, and viability now is, let's just say, 6 months, there's somebody else, a young couple who would love to have this kid, and they'll raise it. So why choke off this developing life?
Yeah.
Because we realize it's going to be an inconvenience to you, but it's no more than that.
Yeah.
Okay, the second area that religion ceases to be ethereal is gay marriage. It sounded good when it came out. 2 people are in love, they want to be together. But then we started to see it delegitimize Catholicism, where you could be punished by the state if you didn't have a gay marriage. You have to bake this cake. And it seems to be used as some sort of tyrannical leftist weapon to torment Christians.
Oh boy, there's a lot there.
Are we for gay marriage or against?
Oh, I'm 100%. Well, not personally me, but I'm the straight guy. But no, again, if we want to move toward universal human rights, where everybody has the same constitutional protections under the law and so on, of course, gays should be able to get married. Now, to me, the interesting twist of late is this whole trans business. Because, gays have for decades been arguing for the biological nature of their homosexuality. It's not a lifestyle choice. At no point did I wake up and go, hey, I think I'm going to try this today. So they're pushing back against this whole trans thing, which is just, this sort of, it's not biological, it's a cultural choice, and you can be anything you want. I've noticed my gay friends have said, hey, we don't like that, because that's kind of making it seem like...
think about it. Gays have been militating against conversion therapy. The idea that you could go take some therapy and choose that you don't want to be gay anymore and kind of work your way out of it. They go, that's impossible, that's a lie, that can never happen, etc. But now, of course, the trans movement is claiming, well, I can pick my gender. And so if you can pick your gender, picking just merely your gender preference, so your sexual preference would not seem to be that far of a stretch.
Yeah.
My thought about the gay marriage issue has always been a little different, and it's essentially rooted not so much in what it means to be gay, but what it means to be married, and what is the point of marriage from society's point of view. Why does society want marriage at all? And the answer is, if you didn't have marriage, you'd have this big ocean of kids.
Yeah.
And they would be wards of the state for the most part, as actually Plato thought they should be. But nevertheless, the state has saved a huge amount of trouble and money when you've got these two creatures called parents who say, okay, listen, we'll take over the whole responsibility. We'll raise these kids and make them into big people, and then we'll put them out into the world. So that is a very valuable social function. Having the child, raising it, looking after it, taking full responsibility for it, nurturing it to adulthood. So the idea was that the government wants to subsidize that. And gay marriage is a contract between two people. They can't make a contract like anyone else. But it's not actually marriage, and society doesn't have the same incentive in backing it. So I want that not to be a refutation of what you said, but just to stand alongside it.
Well, they also seem to have removed monogamy from the equation and said things like Dan Savage was saying, okay, you can cheat once a year. You go, well, without monogamy and kids, there's not much left but the nagging.
Well, but in fairness, the gays have a point there. There'd be like, who destroyed monogamy as an institution? It wasn't the gays. There was plenty of problems in heterosexual marriage.
If you want to talk about a practical aspect, marriage is a curb on promiscuity, and one reason for the AIDS crisis was that men are more promiscuous. Gay guys with gay guys having sex with guys, it's going to spread more. The monogamous commitment in a marriage means that's less likely to happen. This is my argument. This is what some gays were arguing back in the day. And I think that's right. Now, in terms of the practical political argument you made, that would also apply to, say, home ownership. So the government gives me a tax break on the interest I pay on my mortgage because they want to encourage us to be homeowners. Okay, that's fine. But maybe marriage is a different thing, and the state shouldn't be in it at all. Maybe it should just all be contracts.
Well, I mean, in traditional Protestant marriage, it was. I mean, that was the whole idea of separating, you may call it sacramental marriage, from civil marriage. And that the marriage in the church is a sacramental marriage. It's a sacramental covenant between two people with sort of spiritual roots behind it. But then there's civil marriage, which is essentially a glorified contract. And the question is, should the state support that glorified contract? And the trans business, I think, is taking things to a new level because it inverts our normal categories. Well, it inverts our meaning of the word normal. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Traditionally, nature imposes boundaries on us. If I were to say, hey, you know what, I feel like I'm a toad, right? And I start jumping around in a pond. Well, most of you will think, that is a crazy Dinesh, thinks he's a toad. And that would be odd enough. But then if I demanded that you...
Sorry, you sounded very apathetic there. I wouldn't be going, crazy Dinesh, he thinks that. I'd be more like, what the hell happened to Dinesh? He's naked in that swamp, jumping around. Help!
And he's green.
Exactly. And then I would indignantly come out of the pond and basically accuse you of being bigots because you're refusing to accept my identity as a toad. Right? Now, that world, which was once the subject of Mad Magazine and the National Lampoon and fantasy movies and animation, is now our world. I mean, and so that I find a little unnerving. Not even in the moral sense, but merely in the sense of what we understand to be up versus down, common sense versus craziness.
There's this gay man, I call him. He sees himself as a woman, Gigi Gorgeous, and he's had breasts put in, long blonde hair, all kind of estrogen. Still has a penis. He's married to a woman who sees herself as a man but has a vagina. They want to have a baby, but it's not working. And Gigi Gorgeous goes to a gynecologist. And she looks at this penis and says, I think I see the problem here. But the irony is, they have all the parts. They're all set up. We've gone so mental that we just have a very effeminate man married to a very masculine woman, but it's still a heterosexual marriage.
So you would see this in the past in the Moulin Rouge, But right. But what I think what gets me, is the fact that they're trying to make us live in that world.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? They refuse to say, well, okay, well, we're doing this crazy stuff over here. Leave us alone. We just want to be crazy. You may think we're nuts, but that's okay. That's your problem. They're demanding that we accept that world as the world.
And they're demanding others follow suit. Like you have lesbians cutting their breasts off because they're men, and then living as men. And you say, wait a minute, that's what they do in extremist Islam in Saudi Arabia. They force gays to have sex changes so they can say, we don't have gays here, that's a woman. And you go, they call it trans-exclusionary radical feminists. If you don't want lesbians to cut their breasts off, then you're a trans-exclusionary radical feminist. So it gets to the point where we're the benevolent ones here on the right saying, hey, lesbians, you're okay as you. You're not a man. Leave your tits alone.
What do you think, Michael? I mean, this is just so far afield from what the founders thought of as freedom, right?
Yeah, I think, first of all, let's separate two things. There's who you're attracted to and who you think you are. So Andrew Sullivan makes this point, since he's gay, he can say this better than I can. You know, if you're a guy and you're attracted to guys, you're not secretly a woman, you're just a gay guy.
Right.
Okay, so there's that. But then there's the who do I identify as? Do I really feel like a woman in a man's body? That would be a different thing. So I think that's what you're talking about.
Right.
The numbers are so small. This is actually, ironically, a sign of moral progress. You know, we've gone from abolishing slavery and ending the Vietnam War to picking over tiny little bits of discrimination from 0.001% of the population feels discriminated against. So that's a sign of moral progress. But in terms of like these rights conflicts, as long as you're a citizen of the United States, you're protected by the Constitution, and you can't be discriminated against based on anything. Okay, you're fine. It's when the cake baker says, you know what, I don't want to put my artistic talents into this because it violates my religious beliefs. And the person over here wants to order the cake, says, well, but don't I have a right to that cake? So here you get that. I was kind of torn about that particular thing in terms of what America stands for in terms of discrimination. I tend to side on the side of the baker, say to the gay couple, just don't you want to go to a baker that wants to make you a cake? Just go down the street. But then this kind of harkens back to the 1950s of, you can't, if you're black, you can't sit at this bar. And sometimes to make moral progress.
Well, let's stop you there, because I think that's the heart of the matter. The problem in the 1950s was that you couldn't go across the street and get a drink over there.
Right.
Because if you had a lone bartender bigot who wanted to deprive himself of business by saying, listen, I'm going to deny 1/3 of the population the right to eat here, you'd be like, fine, that's your problem. You're limiting your own market. Those guys will go eat next door.
Right.
But the problem is when, and remember, of course, segregation was supported by state laws. So when every bartender isn't going to serve someone, then the guy can say, I feel deprived because there's nowhere I can get a drink in this town.
Right.
And that was not the situation facing the gays. They targeted this guy, Jack Phillips or whatever, the Christian baker.
Many times.
And in fact, even when he won at the Supreme Court level, now some trans woman is suing him again. So to me, this is a kind of legal terrorism, because what they're trying to do not only is terrify him, they're trying to send a message to everyone else. Hey guys, listen, if this is what's going to happen to you if you fall into that category. So to me, that's a serious threat to our liberties. Mm-hmm. Whereas the inconvenience to the gay couple that could get the cake next door and knows it, they're playing a game.
Yeah, that doesn't seem it's not the same, quite
It's
quite
like
the same.
weaponized equality. It starts out sounding good, and then this sound good thing is used to push other people around. Like, we're all for, okay, you want to cut your penis off? Fine, that's none of my business. But then we hear about kids being given hormone blockers to prevent puberty, and you think, well, that sounds like child abuse to me. That doesn't sound like equality.
There we'd have to draw the line at adulthood. You can't do this to a child because of basically the harm principle. And they're not rational adults until they're 20, so they can't make those kinds of decisions.
But
so you're against hormone blockers for kids?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, once you throw the topic open, though, it's tricky. There was just this case on social media about the husband and wife fighting over the 7-year-old kid.
Oh, right.
So basically, the husband said, look at his penis, he's a boy. And the mom said he wants to be a girl. And so there you go.
Right.
And they're in court, unbelievably, and they're fighting about whether they should put him in a dress or put him in a
well,
suit.
that's custody.
Yeah.
But if it was just dressing up, that would be one thing. But these hormone blockers, they change your biology permanently. The neural network wiring and so on gets changed. As far as we know, I mean, there's not much research on this, but it looks like that would not be a good thing. So the law could say, look, not until you're an adult and you make your own decision.
And then you have athletics. That's the latest installment.
Oh,
of this
yeah.
debate.
Well, this is a problem. In cycling, this is my sport. I'm a bike racer, and so you have this man who decided she identifies as a woman, and so she's been cleaning up in these track races against other women, and of course they're not happy about this. And you look at the pictures, and here's this massive dude standing there with huge thighs, and the two women are like second and third place, going, "Yeah, that's just not fair." It's just because there's physical, biological differences.
And so I think when you reach that point, you've got to step back and say, well, maybe we're thinking this the wrong way. We're looking at it, because think about it. The great bad word in the 50s for race was separate but equal, right?
Yeah.
And Brown versus Board of Education overturned Plessy versus Ferguson, knocked out the separate but equal doctrine. But when it comes to men and women and sports, and really any physical activity, we have separate but equal, right? That's why men and women play separately in Wimbledon. They don't play each other.
Right.
It's separate but equal. And that is accepted because of the natural difference, where race is the kind of the painted face, gender is not the same. I think part of the problem is that in our civil rights, race, gender, sexual, they all piggyback on each other. And they all act as if they are the same thing, when they're three different things that actually require three different modes of thought.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, so...
It sounds like the left would be better off with the right in charge. I mean, women are getting run out of track and field meets by this trans BS. And I've always said, like, they want to smash the patriarchy. Their matriarchy would be worse for them. They want to embrace Islam. You have secular liberal Jews wanting to embrace Islam. That's going to be worse for you. So I posit that an America run by Archie Bunker would be more egalitarian than an America run by Meathead.
Well, the problem is, of course, that Archie Bunker, that's a sort of a 1970s version of a 1950s guy. Conservatives today are more liberal than liberals were in the 1950s.
Right.
I suspect you're very liberal socially compared to, say, what you would have been or what John Wayne was or something. When these interviews, like the one of John Wayne in Playboy magazine was recently unarchived from 1972, and he's sort of reflecting the attitudes of the 40s and 50s, talking about the savage Indians and this sort of thing. And it's like, wow. I mean, we would not say that
should
today.
be slapped around.
Yeah.
That's right. It was Sean Connery that said, "You slap him and shack him." It's like, oh my God, he said this to Barbara Walters. But again, he's an old. So things move on. But what is it that's pushing the arc of the moral universe? And it's all of us kind of expanding our consciousness to include more people as honorary members of fully embraced human rights.
Right, but what I'm saying is
that's a liberal tradition.
It's a liberal tradition, but it's a liberal tradition that takes a twist when it's inconvenient. So abortion is a good example. You think, okay, listen, in a culture where we have expanding concentric circles of compassion, we care about the illegal immigrant, the Thai, factory worker, the snail darter, the environment. You would encompass the unborn. They would be included in that widening circle of compassion. Suddenly you'd say, well, in the past we were kind of unsure, but now with science and the ultrasound and this and that, okay, we're going to include you now, even if we didn't see why we should before. So to me, this is all sort of like saying that the Enlightenment tradition is one with which we're enthusiastic, but not without qualification. You have to kind of watch it because it has the ability to turn on you and in the name of liberty actually take away your liberties.
Right.
I mean, look at all this talk about democratic socialism right now. So the basic logic of it seems to be this. If you have 10 people in a room and you can get 6 of them on your side, and those 6 guys then vote to loot the other 4, that's the very definition of morality. Whereas I don't think that the Constitution, the founders, would be okay with any of this. Because that's nothing more than might is right. I mean, that's the old, doctrine of the sophist, that the stronger guy is right to beat up on the weaker guy.
I mean, I know your arguments about, if I give half my sandwich to the guy here, I've made a moral choice, he thanks me, I feel good about myself. Whereas, you, the bureaucrat, come in and you make Dinesh give me his sandwich, I thank you, and you get no credit, and it doesn't feel like a good transaction. I agree with that. Now, the problem is, once you start down the road of, we're going to tax people because, we got to have an army to protect ourselves from external threats. And we need a police force because there's criminals got to have a court system, got to have some jails, we got to have a fire department. Maybe you could privatize the fire department, but you see where I'm going. So once you start down the road, you go, okay, the taxes are going to be 5%. Well, we better make it 8. Well, next year we're going to need 9, and a century later we're at 35%. And maybe it was once 90% above $1 million a year. But so again, this continuum thing, where do you draw the line? If you make a moral argument, like your sandwich example, there shouldn't be any taxes. It should just be all private contracts. But of course, no conservative argues that.
No, but what if we?
Well, let's argue that.
Yeah, the Constitution does use the term the general welfare, right?
Yeah.
So to me, the general welfare is something that is generally beneficial to all of us. If you propose a scheme that benefits all of us, even if I don't agree with it, and we vote it through, I can see why someone thinks, let's say, for example, that a bridge or a road, because you can walk on the road and I can walk on the road. But now if someone is proposing a scheme in which they reach into your pocket or my pocket and then move money into your pocket, to me that doesn't promote the general welfare. That promotes your welfare at my expense. So that's a different kind of transaction. I'm not saying we should never do it, but it doesn't fit the general welfare.
Well, but okay, so a bridge, you can see it or whatever. What about homeless people that are mentally ill, they're drug addicted or whatever? Just the bad luck of being born in an inner city without a father and a drug addicted mother and raised in gangs. They have no idea. They would not know to take the SAT and go to Cornell University and get a degree and work hard, pull themselves up their bootstraps. They don't even have boots. So, don't we have a moral obligation to help them? Yes, through private charity, but that can only take us so far. Isn't that part of the general welfare?
Well, I mean, I think the conservative answer would be twofold. One is that, yes, a safety net, a kind of, you may say, a net below which no one should fall, that is in the general, because that could actually even happen to us. So the point is, at some point, all of us, I mean, it just takes one stroke, right, to knock you out. You can't function as you used to, and then you're dependent in a way you weren't before. So this could happen, and for society to say, we're going to provide a safety net, I think that is a function of government and can be defended on those principles. Apart from that, the job ultimately, I mean, look at our homelessness epidemic, if you will, at least in certain cities. It's a product of addiction. It's a product of mental disease. Now, traditionally, society has had to try to find ways to deal with those things. Yeah. Only recently have courts basically said, look, those guys have civil liberties. They're on their own. Be my guest, take off. I mean, we don't try to care for those people, which I think is unfortunate.
Yeah.
They are actually not getting the care they deserve. They're living in very barbaric conditions. And it's true, they then annoy the tourists and they make faces at the people in the restaurants, but that's not the real problem. The real problem is that no one is actually looking after those people. Yeah. The state certainly isn't doing that. Now, if churches could do it, they'd do a better job. If you're saying it's not enough, but see, I think the problem is the state crowds those people out. Because once the state is doing it, everyone else feels like, well, we have state places for them to sleep.
I gave it the office.
I gave it the office.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, they literally have signs on the subway that say, don't give to the homeless. We have this handled.
Right.
Discouraging people.
I've never seen that sign. But
what should we privatize? Let's take over the country right now.
If Dinesh and I were running the country for
We
before we
education,
we privatize almost everything because whatever the government does, it does badly, and this applies even to things conservatives like the Defense Department. If you run an audit of the Defense Department, now I understand, it doesn't cost the same for a Defense Department coffee mug as for a coffee mug at Walmart. Why? Because that's a coffee mug that has to go on a Navy freighter or it has to go on an airplane. I understand, but it still shouldn't cost $300. It should probably cost $50. And so if it was being supplied by private contractors under competitive bidding, they would probably do a lot better.
So it's still run by the government, but it's all contractors freelance bidding. What about soldiers who go to Afghanistan?
A trickier matter, although historically, as we know, other governments like the French have hired mercenaries and been able to deploy them. We do it to a limited degree. We employ private security forces like Blackstone, is it? So there are, the guys who were in Benghazi. An element of privatization works even in prisons. It works in the military. The
problem I worry about with prisons is it incentivizes keeping them full.
Right.
And we have a crowded prison system. A lot of people that probably shouldn't be there.
That's only because the government is so, they're so stupid that they make rules. I mean, you're absolutely right. When I was in the confinement center, there was a guy who ran his own private insurance company, and he was caught in some insider trading or some sort of nonsense. And they were trying to force him to get his GED. And he said, I don't need a GED. I've actually been in boardrooms, and I'm 45 years old, and I'm past all that. But they went, no, you have to get your GED. And then he realized that for every GED, the prison gets like a bonus of like $3,000.
And they knew it would be a cakewalk.
And they knew it would be a cakewalk because most guys try their GED and they can't get it. They fail. They knew this guy was a sure $3,000.
Yeah.
So I totally get it. But who's to blame for that? The idiots who made the rule in a mindless way and then enforce it without any attention to what's actually going on the ground.
Yeah. One of the most amazing data sets I've seen was in Pinker's latest book, Enlightenment Now. He's got a chart showing the percentage of per capita percentage of GDP that countries spend on social spending, all of it. And the United States is right smack in the middle with these other Northern European countries at about 20%. And Canada is less than us, like 19.5%. And we're more than a few others, and a few Northern European countries have more than us. No matter what we do, it's been this way for half a century or so. We've kind of gone down this path where we're going to spend about a fifth of GDP on social spending. It doesn't seem to be Democrats or Republicans. No one can move it very much.
Yeah, that's a good point. We can sit here and conjecture about what we would do to America if we took it over, but at the end of the day, you had George W. Bush spending way more money than Bill Clinton. It doesn't really matter if it's right or left in office.
Yeah, that's right. And another one on income inequality. We haven't discussed that yet, but Walter Scheidel, who has a huge data set for like 5,000 years of income inequality, said the only thing that moves it at all is massive wars that destroy everything, or a plague, a massive plague like the Black Death.
Wait, do you think women get paid less than men for the same work?
No, I follow Christina Hofsummers on this. I think she's following some economists that show that if you adjust for the amount of time you spend on the job or the exact kind of job, like for example, if you're doing plastic surgery versus pediatrics, you can say, look, they're both doctors and the male doctor makes more than the female doctor. Yeah, but more men are likely to go into cosmetic surgery, which pays more. Women are more likely to go into pediatrics. Okay, so I think when you adjust for that, it's not very much. I'm not particularly worried about that kind of income inequality.
I also think that people have a romance with the 1960s and 70s, and they basically say, listen, in the 60s and 70s, a guy who ran a company was paid only 50 times the average employee. And now look at Jeff Bezos, or look at Steve Jobs. They're making 300 times what the ordinary employee makes. And I think that there's a reason for this. And the reason for this is that essentially in capitalism you go through periods of churn, which is basically when new things are happening, and then periods of stasis, which is when you're kind of consolidating the new stuff that was come up with. So, for example, the so-called Gilded Age from the 1880s to, let's just say, the 1910s was a period of churn. I mean, you have the airplane, you have the car, you have radical changes in society being produced, and by people who are creating incredible consumer welfare. And they're such geniuses that they're building products that consumers don't demand. Henry Ford says, if I ask my customer what he wants, he would want a faster horse, but I gave him the car. The same is true with the iPhone. So what happens is when you come up with this sort of, I call it their supply side creations, they transform the market, they produce enormous consumer welfare. The consumers then make the guy who came up with it very rich. Everyone who shopped at Amazon is making Jeff Bezos all his money. They're freely giving it to him because he came up with stuff like Amazon Prime. And so the inequality is because we have this sort of creative churn. Now, if you think about what did a guy who ran Procter & Gamble in, let's say, 1971 do? Or Ford Motor Company? Nothing is the answer. I mean, they were administrators. They paid. They tried to open up new stores and markets. Half the time, they made bad choices. So I think this is actually a true reflection of the fact that we're living in an entrepreneurial era where all this new stuff is coming. All these young people who are sympathetic to socialism take that for granted. They take for granted granted the world of the Airbnb and Uber. They take for granted the world of their phones and GPS. They never have to wait for someone at the airport, and look for the guy because they have a cell phone. So they live in that world. The world is created by technological capitalism. The inequality that comes out of it is a reflection of consumer welfare. It will stabilize, but we're living through one of those periods, and actually it's a good time to be alive.
So when you were talking about income inequality, you weren't talking about men and women, you were talking about the CEO with 500 million.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Worker.
So I think one aspect on this is conscious capitalism. John Mackey's idea that we're gonna choose to cap the salary of the CEO at 19 times the average worker. That's what Mackey doesn't get paid any. He gets paid $1, so he can make these kind of arguments. There is some sort of weird psychology about where when somebody makes a lot more, I mean not like 10 times, but 1,000 times more, it feels intuitively not quite right. Another thing I've noticed, like one of my best friends made millions of dollars making chocolate chip cookies. He was the founder of the Great American Chocolate Chip Cookie Company. And that just kind of feels right. Like, yeah, you should make a lot of money. You make chocolate chip cookies. But the guy moving digits around on a screen in Wall Street, that doesn't feel like, I don't see what he's making.
Well,
so part of the problem, this is not an argument.
This is a horrible argument. This is basically the same guy who says, like, we should protect, like, cuddly little dogs because they're cute. Right, yeah. We don't care about ugly animals because they just don't, we don't feel the same way about them. No, look, I mean, a smart CEO would not take a gigantic salary because of the practical reason that it's going to make all the vice presidents resentful and it's going to generate a kind of backlash within the company. So it's smarter to have a share of the profit and take a smaller dose in salary. I agree with that prudentially, of course. But look, I think the inequality that we're dealing with today, although great, is not a problem. The other reason I'm optimistic about it is, what do these guys who have all this money do with it? What can you do with it? First of all, you can only eat 3 meals a day. You can only wear 1 pair of pants at a time. So you're going to do one of 3 things with it. You're either going to put it in a bank, and in which case they're going to lend it to other companies, and it's going to get people hired. Or you're going to spend it, and then you're going to build a yacht, and you're going to hire people to do that. Or you're going to give it away. And here's the key point. I trust Bill Gates far more with Bill Gates' money than I trust 450 idiots in the US Congress. If they were to get their hands on, let's just say, half of Bill Gates' money, do you think that they would spend it as wise? Gates is kind of careful. He buys mosquito nets. These are his priorities, but it's his dough. These guys would be essentially going to town. And what they would do is what Andrew Yang does, which is they would use it to buy votes.
Right.
Right? When Andrew Yang says, I want to give you $1,000 a month, what he really means is, I want to tax you. I then want to redistribute the money, but I want you to be thankful to me because I, Andrew Yang, am arranging the transaction. So he's getting something in a different currency, i.e. votes, out of it. And he wants to hide that fact.
Well, here the idea with the UBI, Universal Basic Income, is if there's this crisis where not that Elon Musk, makes 1,000 times more than I make as a middle-class white guy doing fine. It's the guys down here that they can't even afford 3 square meals a day. This guy's out here having all this extra money. Shouldn't we do something about these people down here?
Are you for a universal basic income?
No, I'm probably not. I haven't followed it super carefully. I can see where the arguments are going with AI and all that. At the moment, I'm saying let's just wait until we get there if there's actually a crisis.
Well, see, ironically, here you can understand Trump's tariffs as being a form of redistribution. This is how I look at them. If Trump says, I'm willing to block, let's just say, Chinese products by putting a tariff on them, and I'm going to give that benefit to, let's say, American workers who can now make those products, albeit it costs more and the consumer will pay more. So that's redistribution to me. It's redistribution to the producer or the worker from the consumer. So the consumer at Walmart's going to pay a little more, but 8,000 people are now going to be employed in Ohio. So to me, Trump is actually trying to address that problem, but in his Trumpian way. He's not redistributing from rich to poor, but he's redistributing from consumers who have actually had, by the way, a great deal for the past 30 years. Consumers have been in hog heaven. So redistributing from consumers to producers, to me, not entirely a bad thing.
Yeah. It is a kind of form of redistribution. I hadn't thought of that. What worries me about economic nationalism, this kind of we're circling the wagons, building an economic wall, is that again it's against that long-term trend I like of opening up the borders, let people trade with whoever they want without any third parties in the middle taxing them and taking stuff. That's kind of an Adam Smith argument against mercantilism. Trump's tariffs feel to me like a pre-Adam Smith mercantilist type argument.
Well, I mean, I know that. I recognize that because I was on that side of the aisle.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been a free trader all my life. And I still look at tariffs as a means to get free trade. Because it's sort of like, let's say you put up barriers and I don't, right?
Yeah.
The traditional Milton Friedman argument is, that's okay. I shouldn't put up barriers. Why would I spite myself because you're spiting yourself? But the answer is, look, if I can find a way, this almost mirrors the mutually assured destruction of the Reagan era, where I say, listen, I threatened to put up some tariffs, so you better take down your tariffs, otherwise you're not going to be able to sell your stuff over here, your cars over here. And the net result is I am able to use leverage to make you do that.
Okay.
Then we get more free trade out of it. So it can be seen as a political weapon to get free trade.
But earlier when you were talking about that kid in the inner city who had a drug-addicted mom and he can't go to Stanford or whatever, if we had strong borders, there would not be illegals doing the burger flipping jobs, and he would have an opportunity to go do some minimum wage jobs to get himself on his feet. Right now, we don't have that because we have illegals doing all those jobs, and I think we've deprived. The lack of economic nationalism has deprived the poor of good jobs.
I don't have any problems with Mexicans doing those jobs. I mean, I live in California. We have millions, and let the market decide what jobs need to be filled by who. I don't care.
But when you open the border, that's not the market. It's the global market.
Okay, so first of all, no one's in favor of just completely opening the borders or completely closing the borders. It's again that spectrum. Like, where do you draw the line? And I think we've done fairly well between, say, Japan, which lets almost nobody in, and Australia, which is pretty tight, I think, versus some other countries that have much more open borders. I think we've done a fairly good job. I'm not sure why it's so heated right at the moment. We've always had these debates.
Who has more open borders than we do?
I can't think of anybody at the.
I don't think anyone does.
The other thing is, I think, green cards than any other country.
I mean, I'm in the middle on this. I mean, I grant that there are certain types of jobs that we would welcome other people doing, and there are certain types of jobs that Americans will not do, or at least will not do at the going rate, or close to it. Agricultural labor in California being a pretty good example. Now, the old solution to this, going back to the 50s, was the guest worker program. And the basic idea is really simple. If there's certain types of specific jobs, we bring in 10,000 workers from Mexico. They come in here on a guest worker status. They work, they pay taxes, they can send the money home. But see, they can't vote and they can't stay.
Right.
They're here to make money and go back. And interestingly, it was the Cesar Chavez union people who killed that program, because they didn't want the Mexicans coming in here and working for less. They wanted to kick him out of here. And so the guest worker program was stopped. And so now we have this problem where the illegal problem is mixed in with the issue of becoming a citizen and voting, and that I think has corrupted the debate. It has made we can't debate the national interest, because now we have to debate the Democratic Party's interest in relocating people to here, making them citizens, and getting new voters.
Yeah, again, it's a hard problem once we're all the way down that pathway. We have 12 million people. I think it is illegal aliens in America. You can't kick them out. So we got to
30 million now.
Whatever the number is.
This is my wife's idea, and I think she's quite right. If you were to say the illegals can all stay with one proviso, they can never vote. Now, see, frankly,
the DNC would drop the subject.
Yeah, the illegals wouldn't care, because they're not here to vote. They're here for a better life. They're here to work. So they would. That's a deal they would take overnight. But of course, the politics would change completely. And so
Has anyone proposed that?
Well, I mean,
besides your wife,
it should be, right?
Wait, hold on. Cops, we got to get out of here.
What?
So, if you enjoyed that clip,
then subscribe to Compound Censored using this promo code.